After we got married, my husband and I kept sleeping in separate rooms.At first. I asked if he could move into the primary bedroom.He refused without the slightest hesitation.No. Rosalie would mind.If it weren't for you, we wouldn't have ended up like this. Let's just keep things this way. Rosalie was his first love. I stood there frozen for a long time before finally saying okay. Later I told myself that this marriage was only meant to help my family survive a cash flow crisis and solve a difficult lawsuit his company was facing. It was just a fair exchange. Once everything was settled, we would naturally go our separate ways. After that, I never brought it up again. For the next 3 years, he brought her to every occasion. Family dinners, annual galas, even my mother's birthday. She was always the one standing beside him. Everyone kept guessing who the real woman of the house was. Now everything that needed to be solved has been solved, and it is time for me to leave. I sat in the study and read the divorce agreement. From beginning to end one more time. Everything was written clearly in black and white. In the property division section, I asked for nothing. The house he had owned before marriage would remain his. The car would remain his. Company shares had nothing to do with me. All I needed to take was my own savings. I signed my name on the agreement. Natalie Ramsey. 3 years ago, I had still believed that, even though this marriage began as a transaction, maybe we could still make something decent out of it. I was so stupid back then. I put the agreement into a folder and placed it on the coffee table. Then I took out my phone and opened our chat. Come home earlier today. I have something to discuss with you. About 2 minutes later, one word appeared beside his profile picture. Okay. I turned off my phone and tossed it onto the couch. Then I went to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. The kitchen was huge with a double-door refrigerator, a built-in oven and German imported cookware, all arranged neatly in its place. I rarely used it when we had just gotten married. I tried cooking a few times, thinking he might like to come home to a hot meal. The first time I made braised ribs. He tasted one bite and said it was fine. Then he took a phone call and left, saying something had happened with Rosalie. The second time I made fish stew. He did not come home at all. The third time I cooked an entire table of food, working from 4 in the afternoon until 7 at night. He did come home that time, but Rosalie was behind him. The two of them walked in laughing and talking. When he saw the table full of dishes, he froze for a second then said, "We already have plans going out to eat." Rosalie stood behind him, tilted her head and smiled at me. "You worked so hard." Even now remembering that smile still makes my stomach turn sour. After that, I never cooked again. At 7 that evening, he did not come home. At 8, he still was not home. At 9, my phone rang. I picked it up and saw a message from him. Something came up with Rosalie. "I'll be home late. Go to bed first. Don't wait for me." I stared at that message for a long time. Go to bed first. Don't wait for me. I had heard that sentence for 3 years. Every time it was like this. Every time it was Rosalie. There was always something going on with her. He always had to deal with it. When she had a cold, he had to keep her company. When she was upset, he had to keep her company. When she moved, he had to help. Even when she adopted a cat, he had to be there. Once Rosalie said she wanted cake from a bakery across town. He drove 40 minutes to buy it, delivered it to her apartment, and waited until she finished eating before coming home. By then, it was already 1 in the morning. I asked him, "Did you eat dinner?" He said, "I ate at Rosalie's." Then he showered and went into the study. I should have understood everything that day, but I did not. I kept thinking that since we were married, we should give each other time. Maybe after enough days passed, he would realize I was not that bad. Maybe if I did well enough, he would be willing to turn around and look at this home. Now that I think about it, if someone has no place for you in his heart, it does not matter how well you do. He will not fall in love with you because you are good. He will only think your goodness has nothing to do with him. I did not reply to his message. Before, I would always reply with okay to show him that I understood. Sometimes I would add, "Be careful," as if that made me generous and sensible. But today I did not want to reply. In a few days, I would not receive his messages anymore. Anyway, I put my phone on the coffee table and changed the channel with the remote. A variety show was playing on TV. A few celebrities were laughing loudly on stage. I leaned back against the couch and suddenly found the scene absurd. I was sitting in this 2,000 square foot house, guarding a marriage that existed in name only, waiting for a man who would never keep me in his heart to come home. And he was with his first love openly, rightfully, because when we first got married, he had already made himself very clear. If it were not for you, we would not have ended up like this. What he meant was that I had broken him and Rosalie apart, that I had inserted myself between them and forced them to separate, that I had used my family's influence in that lawsuit to force his name onto a marriage certificate with mine. But what was the truth? Truth was that my father's company had a broken cash flow and urgently needed capital. and his company was caught in a troublesome lawsuit that needed my family's connections to settle. The elders from both families sat down for one meal and decided on this marriage. No one asked if I wanted to marry him. No one asked if he was willing to marry me. But in everyone's eyes, it was a fair trade. He provided money. My family provided connections. We each got what we needed. Only Rosalie became the sacrifice in that transaction. Probably believed I stole her place, that I turned her from the legitimate girlfriend into the first love, who had to hide in the shadows. So he gave all his guilt to Rosalie and left all his coldness for me. On our wedding night, he drank a lot and was helped into the bedroom. I took off his coat and loosened his tie. He grabbed my wrist, his grip frighteningly strong. Natalie Ramsey, he called my full name, his voice hoarse. I know exactly what this marriage is. I don't love you, and I never will. If you're smart, you'll behave and be Mrs. Whitmore in name only. Don't expect me to touch you. Then he let go of me and stumbled into the guest room. From then on, we slept in separate rooms. He slept in the guest room. I slept in the primary bedroom. It suddenly occurred to me that in these 3 years, he'd only entered the primary bedroom twice. The first time was our wedding night when he said those words. The second time was last year, when I had a fever of 103 degrees and was barely conscious. Mrs. Lane called him. He came home 2 hours later, stood at the bedroom door, glanced at me and told Mrs. Lane to take me to the hospital. Then he left again. He said Rosalie had an important party and he had to attend. He did not come home for the rest of the night. When I woke up at 7 the next morning, I glanced at my phone. There were no messages. After washing up, I went downstairs. Mrs. Lane was already preparing breakfast. Seeing me come down alone, she opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something. But in the end, she only asked, "Ma'am, what would you like for breakfast?" "Plain oatmeal is fine." I sat down at the dining table, and my phone screen lit up. It was a message from him. "Rosalie drank too much last night, so I stayed with her and took care of her. I have a meeting this morning and won't be back." Put down my phone and took a sip of oatmeal. "Mrs. Please buy a few more cardboard boxes for me over the next few days." She froze. "Ma'am, are you moving?" "Yes, in a few days." She opened her mouth as if she wanted to ask something, but when she saw my expression, she swallowed the words back down. She had worked in this house for 3 years. She had seen everything. She understood everything. "All right, ma'am," she answered and turned back into the kitchen. After finishing my oatmeal, I went upstairs and changed. I had made an appointment with a real estate agent today. Before I moved out of this house, I needed to find a new place to stay. The divorce agreement said I would take none of the marital assets, but that did not mean I was penniless. I had some savings from before the marriage. Over the past 3 years, even though I had not worked, the Whitmore family had deposited $20,000 into my account every month for living expenses. I had barely spent any of it and had saved most of it together. That was enough for me to rent a decent apartment and support myself for a year or so. For what came after that, I would think about it later. The agent was a young woman with a ponytail who spoke very quickly. She showed me a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city, not far from downtown. The neighborhood was nice too. "Miss Ramsey, this unit has excellent natural light. The landlord just renovated it, and all the furniture and appliances are new. The rent is $6,500 a month. What do you think?" I stood on the balcony and looked around. The view was open and I could see a park in the distance. The apartment was not big, but it was more than enough for one person. Most importantly, there were no memories of Adrian Whitmore. "Here. This works. Take it." The agent clearly did not expect me to decide so quickly. She froze for a second, then smiled brightly. "Great, great. I'll contact the landlord right away and arrange the lease." I signed a 1-year lease and paid the deposit and rent. When I walked out with the keys, the sun was warm and bright. Standing by the road with the keys in my hand, I suddenly felt very light. That afternoon when I returned home, Mrs. Lane had already placed several cardboard boxes in the living room. I was about to go upstairs to pack the walk-in closet when I heard movement at the door. I did not turn around, but I already had a faint feeling. Sure enough, in the next second, a familiar voice sounded behind me. "Oh, you're home." I turned around. Rosalie Quinn stood in the entryway. I saw the box in my hand, and her gaze paused on me for a second. "Are you packing?" I did not answer her question. I only asked calmly, "Why are you here?" "Adrian brought me. My lease is up and I haven't found a new place yet. He told me I could stay here for now, for as long as I need." I only nodded and said, "Oh." Rosalie clearly had not expected this reaction. Her smile stiffened for a moment. "You don't mind, do you?" She tilted her head and looked at me. "Actually, I also think it's a little inconvenient. But Adrian insisted." I said, "If he told you to come, then stay." I interrupted her. "There are plenty of rooms here anyway." She pressed her lips together and walked over to sit by the couch. "You're really generous." Generous enough to marry into this house back then. And now generous enough to let me move in. I looked at her and suddenly found it a little funny I did not respond. I turned to go upstairs. Rosalie probably felt ignored. Her voice rose a little. Natalie, I'm talking to you. I stopped and looked back at her. I heard you, but you didn't come here to chat with me. So why waste each other's time? I still have things to pack. Rosalie stood up. The smile on her face disappeared completely. You're leaving, she blurted. Disbelief in her tone. What else? Stay here on third wheel for the two of you. Rosalie stood completely stunned. I turned and walked upstairs, leaving her alone in the living room. Opening my closet, I began taking down my clothes one by one. After 3 years, I barely had enough belongings to fill 2 boxes. Adrian had never taken me shopping, nor had he ever given me a gift for our anniversary, my birthday or Valentine's Day. Looking back now, it was almost laughable. As I taped the last box shut, my phone chimed with a message from Adrian. I have a business dinner tonight and won't be home for dinner. Rosalie just moved in. Please arrange a guest room for her. I set the phone aside and kept packing. Evening, I had finished packing the closet and the study, carrying the folder containing the divorce agreement. Downstairs, I saw Rosalie sitting on the couch sipping coffee. She looked up, her eyes immediately fixing on the folder in my hand. What's that? I tossed the folder onto the coffee table and sat in the armchair across from her. Rosalie stared at it for a few seconds, then let out a soft laugh. A divorce agreement. My silence gave her her answer. Her eyes lit up, not with shock, but with unmistakable excitement. You're really divorcing him? Yes. When she pressed. When he comes home tonight. I said evenly, this marriage was always just a trade. Now that everything is settled, ending it sooner is better for everyone. She stared at me for a long time. Her expression complicated now. Suddenly she lowered her voice. Do you really not like him or are you just pretending? I froze for a moment. Did I not like him? 3 years ago, I actually had expectations. Adrian was handsome, successful and commanding. I thought if I was good enough, considerate enough and sensible enough, he might turn my way eventually. But those expectations died a long time ago. It doesn't matter anymore. I answered quietly. Whether I liked him or not belongs in the past. At 9 that night, Adrian finally came home. He glanced at Rosalie on the couch first, his gaze softening immediately. Rosalie, are you settling in all right? It's very nice, he replied sweetly. Only then did Adrian turn his attention to me. His eyes swept over me, lingered on the folder on the coffee table, and finally landed on the stacked boxes behind me. His brows furrowed. What's with all these boxes? I stood up, picked up the folder from the coffee table, and held it out to him. Adrian, we need to talk. He didn't take it, looking at me with a trace of confusion. What is this? A divorce agreement, I said. Adrian didn't reach out to take the folder. He stood in the entryway of the high-ceilinged living room, his hands still lingering on his suit jacket buttons, his shadow stretching across the polished marble floor. His eyes darted from the manila folder in my hand to the 2 brown cardboard boxes sitting neatly by the stairs, then back to my face. A divorce agreement, he repeated. His voice wasn't angry, it was flat-tinged, with a slight, mocking incredulity. Is this a new game, Natalie? Because you're tired of Rosalie staying here? Rosalie, who was sitting on the sofa with her legs tucked under her cashmere cardigan, looked up with wide, innocent eyes. She set her porcelain coffee cup down with a soft clink. Adrian, please don't fight on my account. If my being here makes Natalie uncomfortable, I can find a hotel. I didn't mean to create trouble. You aren't creating trouble, Adrian said, his tone instantly softening as he addressed her. He took off his jacket, draped it casually over the arm of the chair, and finally turned his gaze back to me. His expression hardened into the familiar coldness I had lived with for 3 years. You don't need to leave, Rosalie. This house has 6 bedrooms. If Natalie is throwing a lingering tantrum, after 3 years of silence, she can say what she wants like an adult. I didn't flinch. I didn't feel the sharp, hollow pang in my chest that used to accompany his dismissive words. That pang had died somewhere around the 2nd year, on a rainy Tuesday when I waited up until midnight with cold soup on the table while he bought pastries across town for another one of Rosalie's sudden cravings. I'm not throwing a tantrum, Adrian, I said quietly. My voice was steady, echoing softly against the tall walls. The papers are signed. Everything is laid out clearly. I've waived claim to all marital property, the house, the cars, the investments, the spousal support. You don't owe me anything, and I don't owe you anything. All I need from you is your signature. Adrian's eyebrows drew together. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of genuine confusion crossed his features. He stepped forward, took the folder from my hand, and flipped it open. His eyes scanned the first page quickly, expecting to find demands, a hefty settlement, real estate, company shares. That was how business transactions worked, and in his mind, our marriage had always been a bitter trade. But as he turned to the second and third pages, his thumb paused against the crisp paper. Waiver of spousal support. Natalie Ramsey. Division of real estate. Natalie Ramsey claims zero interest in the primary residence. Division of liquid assets. Natalie Ramsey retains only personal premarital savings. You didn't ask for a single cent? He muttered, looking up at me, his jaw tightening. What is this? Some kind of psychological play? You think by acting generous I'll feel guilty. I don't care how you feel, Adrian, I said simply. 3 years ago you told me this marriage was a business transaction to save my family's cash flow and clear your company's legal troubles. The lawsuit was settled 18 months ago. My family's business stabilized last spring. The transaction is complete. There is no reason for us to pretend anymore. Rosalie shifted on the couch, her eyes fixated on the papers in Adrian's hand. Natalie, you really don't have to do this. Adrian and I, we're just friends. Now, you don't have to give up your position as Mrs. Whitmore out of spite. I turned to look at Rosalie. For 3 years I had viewed her as a mountain I couldn't cross, an invisible wall between my husband and me. But sitting there, wrapped in her soft clothes, carefully monitoring every shift in Adrian's expression, she suddenly looked small. I'm not giving up anything, Rosalie, I told her, my voice gentle, almost pitying. I'm leaving a house that was never mine. You don't need to perform for me anymore. You can have the position. You can have him. Natalie, Adrian snapped, his patience snapping. Watch your mouth. I'm going upstairs to get my coat, I said, ignoring his anger entirely. The movers are coming tomorrow morning at 8 to pick up those 2 boxes. Mrs. Lane has the keys. You can sign the papers whenever your lawyer looks them over. But I won't be coming back here. I turned around and walked toward the stairs. Natalie, stop right there. Adrian's sharp voice rang out behind me, heavy with authority. He wasn't used to me walking away. For 3 years, whenever he spoke, I stood there, listening quietly, absorbing his frustration, waiting for a breadcrumb of attention that never came. I didn't stop. I kept my foot on the first wooden step, then the second, my hand sliding along the smooth mahogany railing. If you walk out that door tonight, don't think you can come crawling back when your family's finances dip again, he called out, his voice laced with harsh pride. I won't give you a second chance. I stopped at the landing, turned around, and looked down at him standing in the grand entryway, the divorce papers held tight in his right hand. I know, I said softly. That's why I'm leaving tonight. The moving truck arrived at my new apartment at 9:30 the next morning. It was a bright, crisp autumn day. The East Side apartment was on the 7th floor, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the morning light and held it long into the afternoon. There was no grand marble entryway, no crystal chandeliers, no silent, suffocating hallways where every footstep sounded like an apology. There was only the fresh smell of clean paint, the warmth of wooden floors, and the sound of wind rustling through the yellow oak trees in the park across the street. I tipped the 2 movers, set my 2 boxes in the center of the living room, and sat down on the hardwood floor with my back against the wall. For the first time in 3 years, the silence around me didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like peace. My phone chimed on the floor beside me. I picked it up, expecting a message from the bank or the real estate agent. Instead, it was an alert from an industry news app. Whitmore Enterprises expands tech acquisition ahead of Q4 gala. Underneath the headline was a press photo taken just 2 weeks ago at a charity dinner. Adrian stood in the center in a tailored black tuxedo, cold, handsome, and imposing. Standing right beside him, holding his arm with an understated familiarity, was Rosalie, wearing an emerald green gown. I remembered that night clearly. I had spent 3 hours getting ready in the quiet primary bedroom, dressing in a pale gray silk gown that Adrian's assistant had sent over. Just as I was putting on my earrings, Adrian had knocked on the door, one of his rare visits to my room, only to tell me that Rosalie's car had broken down on the highway, and he was going to pick her up. You go ahead in the driver's car, he had said, not even looking at my dress. Rosalie isn't feeling well tonight. She needs someone she trusts at the event. I had sat alone in the back of the town car, arrived at the venue alone, and watched from a corner table near the back as he walked the red carpet with Rosalie on his arm. Throughout the night, business partners had approached me with polite, uncomfortable smiles, murmuring words like, Miss Ramsey, Mrs. Whitmore, right? Mr. Whitmore seems very busy tonight. I wiped the screen, closed the app, and uninstalled it. Then I took out my laptop, opened my old email account, the one I hadn't used since I married into the Whitmore family, and began typing a message to my former mentor at the Lynn & Associates architecture firm. Before I became Mrs. Whitmore in name only, I was an honors graduate from the School of Design, a promising junior architect who had spent her nights over blueprints and foam models. But 3 years ago, when my father's health failed and the family firm faced bankruptcy, I agreed to the marriage, resigned from my job, and stepped into the golden cage Adrian built for me. Subject: inquiry regarding junior project designer positions. Dear Mr. Lin, I hope this email finds you well. It has been 3 years since I left the firm. I pressed send, leaned back against the wall, and closed my eyes. The sun washed over my face, warm and uncompromisingly bright. Back at the Whitmore estate, the atmosphere was suffocatingly quiet, though in a very different way than before. Adrian sat at the long dining table, his laptop open in front of him, a cup of black coffee cooling by his elbow. It was 7:30 in the morning. Normally, at this hour, the house was entirely silent, save for the subtle movement of Mrs. Lane in the kitchen. When Natalie lived here, she was always awake early, but she rarely came downstairs until he had left for work. She moved like a phantom, avoiding his path, leaving no trace of her presence except for a quiet, gentle atmosphere that he had long taken for granted. Adrian. Rosalie's voice drifted down from the second floor. She was wearing a silk robe, one she had bought herself the day before, and her hair was down. She walked down the curved staircase, her slippers making a soft slap-slap sound against the marble steps. Did the movers already come? She asked, looking toward the entryway where the 2 cardboard boxes had sat the night before. I didn't hear a thing. They came at 8, Adrian said, his eyes not leaving his laptop screen. They took her things. Oh, Rosalie walked into the dining room, pulling back the chair across from him. The chair where Natalie used to sit during those rare, brief breakfasts when they were forced to sit together before family gatherings. She really left fast. I thought she was just putting on a performance to get your attention. Adrian's fingers paused over the keyboard. A subtle flicker of annoyance rippled through his chest, though he couldn't quite pinpoint why. Natalie doesn't put on performances. Rosalie paused, caught off guard by his defense of me. She laughed lightly, a sound that usually charmed him, but today felt oddly grating. Well, you have to admit, it was very dramatic. Leaving a divorce agreement on the coffee table. Like that. But honestly, Adrian, isn't this better? You don't have to carry the burden of this fake marriage anymore. You're free. Free, Adrian repeated slowly. He looked at the empty seat opposite him. The table was polished to a high sheen, reflecting the cold ceiling light. For 3 years, he had told himself that Natalie Ramsey was a shackle forced upon him by circumstance, a calculating woman whose family took advantage of his company's vulnerability to secure a wealthy marriage. He had convinced himself that treating her with absolute coldness was a matter of principle, a way to preserve his autonomy and punish the woman who took Rosalie's place. Mrs. Lane, Adrian called out toward the kitchen. Mrs. Lane stepped out, wearing her clean white apron, her hands folded politely in front of her. Yes, Mr. Whitmore? Serve breakfast, Adrian ordered, returning his eyes to his screen. Breakfast is already served, sir, Mrs. Lane said quietly. She pointed to the slice of plain toast and black coffee beside his laptop. Where are the poached eggs? The warm almond milk? Adrian's brow furrowed. And the morning paper? Mrs. Lane looked at him steadily, her face devoid of the warm deference she usually held. Mrs. Whitmore, Natalie, used to prepare those for you every morning. Before I even came on shift, sir. She personally selected the roast for your coffee beans and folded the financial paper. I only cook according to the standard household manual now. Adrian froze. He looked down at the mug of coffee. He had always assumed the rich, smooth flavor of his morning coffee was just a particular brand Mrs. Lane bought. He had assumed the poached eggs were made by the staff. He had never once considered that the quiet, dutiful woman sleeping in the primary bedroom upstairs was waking up at 6 in the morning to prepare his breakfast with her own hands, only to retreat to her room before he came downstairs so he wouldn't have to look at her. I see, Adrian said after a long silence. His voice was cold, masking a sudden, unexplainable tightness in his throat. That won't be necessary anymore. You may go. Mrs. Lane gave a slight bow and retreated into the kitchen. Rosalie reached across the table, laying her slim fingers over his hand. Don't mind it, Adrian. I can learn to make those things for you. I'm much better at cooking than she ever was. Adrian looked down at Rosalie's hand on his. For 3 years he had believed that Rosalie was the only woman he wanted near him. But right now, looking at her smile, a strange, uncomfortable thought struck him. Rosalie had been in the house for less than 24 hours, and already, the quiet elegance of his life felt cluttered, loud, and unexpectedly hollow. 2 weeks passed in the blink of an eye. I spent those 14 days immersed in work and simple routines. Mr. Lin had Responded to my email within 3 hours of receiving it, inviting me to his office for a chat. He didn't ask about my marriage, nor did he pry into why a woman married to a billionaire was applying for an associate design role. You were the best drafting student I ever had, Natalie, Mr. Lin had said, sliding a thick project file across his mahogany desk. Your sense of space and natural light isn't something people forget. The firm is bidding on the West.At Center renovation. I need someone who can work 16 hours a day and doesn't care about corporate politics. Are you in? I'm in. I told him without a second of hesitation. Starting over at 26 wasn't easy, but it was intoxicating. I traded my soft silk dresses and diamond earrings for high-waisted linen trousers, comfortable flats, and rolled-up white shirts. My days were filled with measuring tape, CAD drawings, site visits, and the smell of fresh timber and wet cement. My hands, which had spent 3 years holding teacups in quiet rooms, grew familiar with digital stylus pens and architectural scales again. One rainy Thursday afternoon, I was standing under a scaffolding at the West.District construction site, wearing a yellow hard hat and holding a tablet, directing 2 workers on the placement of a concrete pillar. Miss Ramsey, my assistant, an energetic young graduate named Maya, ran over, holding an umbrella over my head. The head client from the city board is here. Early. And he brought the main financial sponsor with him. Sponsor? I wiped a smudge of drywall dust from my cheek, adjusting my blueprints. I thought the municipal fund was handling the primary investment. They were, but Whitmore Enterprises just acquired the surrounding commercial land yesterday, Maya whispered nervously. They're co-funding the development. Now, I stopped in my tracks. Before I could process her words, a fleet of black sedans pulled up outside the open structure of the site. A group of men in dark suits stepped out under large black umbrellas held by aides. In the center of the group stood Adrian. He was wearing a charcoal double-breasted suit, his hair swept back, looking every bit the ruthless tycoon he was. Walking beside him was his senior legal team and 2 municipal officers. I stood under the scaffolding, holding my tablet, my linen shirt slightly damp from the spray of the rain. I didn't hide. I didn't step behind the scaffolding. I simply stood there, quiet and grounded, watching them approach. Adrian was listening to a city official talk about the spatial zoning when his eyes swept across the open concrete floor. His gaze landed on me and paused. He stopped walking. The entire delegation behind him came to a sudden halt. The city official blinked, confused. Mr. Whitmore? Is there something wrong with the layout? Here. Adrian didn't answer the official. His sharp, dark eyes were locked onto my face. For 3 years he had seen me only in soft, neutral tones, a muted, compliant figure sitting on the edge of a couch or standing silently in the background of family dinners. He had never seen me like this, my hair tied back in a messy knot under a hard hat, dust on my cheek, my eyes bright, clear, and shining with an intense, professional focus. He looked at me as if he were looking at a stranger who looked impossibly striking. Natalie. His voice carried across the echoing concrete space, low and sharp. Mr. Whitmore, I replied, stepping forward with a professional, polite smile. I didn't address him as my husband, nor did I show any awkwardness. I gave a slight nod to the city official. Welcome to the West.District site. I'm Natalie Ramsey, the lead space designer for Lin and Associates. Adrian's jaw tightened visibly. Lead designer. Yes, I said, turning my tablet toward the group. If you look at the spatial blueprint here, the core structure will retain the original brick facade, while introducing open glass walls to maximize natural morning light. I began my presentation. My voice was smooth, precise, and completely composed. I didn't look at Adrian for reassurance. I didn't search his face for approval. I spoke to the entire team, answering technical questions about structural load and budget allocations with calm authority. Throughout the 20-minute presentation, Adrian didn't say a single word. Stood there under the cold light of the construction site, his eyes fixed on me, his hands clenched tightly inside his coat pockets. When the presentation ended, the city officials applauded softly. Impressive work, Miss Ramsey. Mr. Lin certainly picked the right person for this concept. Thank you. I smiled warmly. As the group began moving toward the east wing of the site, Adrian lingered behind. The rain was falling harder outside, hitting the metal roof with a heavy rhythm. Can I have a word with you, Miss Ramsey? He asked, his tone laced with a thick, unfamiliar tension. I turned back, handing my hard hat to Maya. Of course, Mr. Whitmore. About the site budget. Adrian stepped closer, stepping out of the line of sight of his staff. He looked down at me, his brow heavily furrowed. What are you doing here, Natalie? I'm working, I answered cleanly. Working. He looked at the dust on my shirt, his voice tight. You're standing on a dirty construction site in the rain. Is this your way of trying to embarrass me? Making people think I left you destitute after the divorce? I stared at him for a long moment, then let out a low, breathless laugh. It wasn't an angry laugh. It was genuinely amused. Adrian, I said, looking straight into his dark eyes. Not everything I do revolves around you. I am an architect. I was an architect before I met you. And I am an architect now that I've left you. My life doesn't exist to embarrass you or impress you. He flinched, as if I had struck him across the face with a flat palm. The divorce papers are still sitting on my desk, he said, his voice dropping an octave rough and urgent. I haven't signed them. That's your choice, I said evenly. My lawyer will follow up with your office next week. If you refuse to sign, we will simply proceed through the court after the statutory period. It makes no difference to me. I picked up my tablet, gave him a small, courteous nod and turned my back on him, walking away into the warm light of the site office without looking back. Once, Adrian stood alone under the gray rain, watching my receding back until I disappeared behind the glass door. 3 weeks after the encounter at the construction site, Adrian sat in the private study of his family's senior legal counsel, Mr. Vance, a man who had managed the Whitmore family's legal and financial affairs for over 30 years. You called me here regarding the divorce filings, Mr. Vance? Adrian asked, taking a seat in the heavy leather armchair. He looked tired. Deep shadows lay beneath his eyes, and his suit hung slightly looser than usual. For the past month, his home had felt wrong. Rosalie had redecorated the living room, replacing the clean, warm tones Natalie had chosen with lavish, bright furniture that looked like a hotel lobby. She complained constantly about Mrs. Lane's cooking, demanded that he fire the old staff, and brought her socialite friends over for loud afternoon teas. Every time Adrian came home late from work, expecting the quiet, peaceful sanctuary he used to take for granted, he was met with chaos, complaints, and Rosalie asking him when he was going to buy her a new sports car to match her position as his girlfriend. Yes, Adrian, Mr. Vance said, putting on his reading glasses and sliding a thick blue folder across the desk. I reviewed the terms submitted by Natalie's legal team. Frankly, I've never seen a cleaner, more generous exit in my 40 years of practice. She is asking for literally nothing. Adrian's jaw set. She's being stubborn. Mr. Vance looked over the rim of his glasses at the young man he had watched grow up. Is she stubborn, Adrian? Or is she simply done? Adrian didn't answer. There is something else you need to see, Mr. Vance continued, opening a drawer and pulling out a yellowed document from 3 years ago. Before I process this divorce, I think you ought to read the original agreement from the merger 3 years ago. Adrian frowned. I know what was in the agreement. Her father needed our emergency capital to cover their cash flow collapse, and in exchange my father demanded a family marriage to secure the land rights. She used my company's legal crisis to force her way into my life. Mr. Vance let out a long, heavy sigh and shook his head. Adrian, who told you that story? My father, Adrian said, his brow tightening. And Rosalie? Your father lied to protect your pride, and Miss Quinn told you whatever kept you dependent on her, Mr. Vance said bluntly. He tapped his finger against the yellowed document. 3 years ago, Whitmore Enterprises wasn't just facing a troublesome lawsuit. The former CFO had committed massive embezzlement, and the board was facing criminal indictments. We needed top-tier political and judicial connections to clear the firm's name, connections that only Arthur Ramsey, Natalie's father, possessed. Adrian's breath hitched. What? Arthur Ramsey didn't come to us begging for money, Mr. Vance said, his voice slow and deliberate. We went to him begging for help. Arthur agreed to use his entire lifetime of political credit to shield your company. But he was dying of heart disease, and he knew his company would collapse without capital once he passed. He made one condition. He wanted his daughter, Natalie, to be protected by a stable, wealthy family so she wouldn't be hunted by corporate predators after he died. Mr. Vance leaned forward, looking Adrian dead in the eye. Natalie didn't force her way into your family, Adrian. She gave up her career at Lynn and Associates, set aside her personal life, and agreed to marry a man who hated her. Also, she could secure the capital needed to keep her father's workers paid while her father saved your family from prison. The room went dead silent. The sound of the wall clock ticking seemed to grow deafeningly loud. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Adrian sat frozen in the chair, the blood draining completely from his face. His hands gripped the mahogany armrest so tightly that his knuckles turned stark white. I know exactly what this marriage is. I don't love you, and I never will. If you're smart, you'll behave and be Mrs. Whitmore in name only. The words he had spat at her on their wedding night echoed in his ears like loud, terrifying claps of thunder. He remembered her face that night, pale, quiet, holding her hands together in front of her white dress, saying nothing as he humiliated her, and walked out to the guest room. He remembered the night she had a 103-degree fever, shivering under the thin blanket, her lips dry and cracked. He had stood at the bedroom door for less than 30 seconds before leaving her alone to take Rosalie to a social gala. He remembered every cold text he had sent her. Something came up with Rosalie. "Don't wait for me." And her invariable, quiet reply, "Okay." She wasn't calculating. She wasn't greedy. She was carrying the heavy weight of an entire transaction she had agreed to out of filial love, enduring his frost and contempt for 3 solid years without uttering a single word of defense or complaint. And Miss Quinn, Mr. Vance added softly, adding one final blow. 3 years ago, when Whitmore Enterprises was under legal investigation, Miss Quinn's family immediately pulled their investments and sent her abroad to distance themselves from you. It was only after Arthur Ramsay cleared your company's name that she mysteriously returned, claiming her heart had been broken. Adrian felt a violent, sickly wave of nausea surge in his chest. He stood up so abruptly that his leather chair scraped loudly against the floor. He didn't say goodbye to Mr. Vance. He snatched the divorce folder off the desk, turned, and strode out of the office into the cold afternoon air. When Adrian arrived back at the mansion at 6 that evening, the living room was filled with laughter. Rosalie was sitting on the newly purchased white velvet sofa, wearing an expensive designer dress, laughing with 2 of her high society friends. On the glass coffee table were several half-empty wine glasses, open makeup boxes, and crumbs from expensive pastries scattered across the carpet. "Adrian." Rosalie stood up with a bright smile, walking over to wrap her arms around his waist. "You're home early. Look at these new curtains I ordered for the primary bedroom. The gold silk matches my..." Adrian grabbed her wrists and pulled her off him. His grip was so hard that Rosalie gasped, her smile instantly freezing. "Adrian? You're hurting me." "Get out," Adrian said. His voice was dangerously quiet, vibrating with a cold, terrifying fury. The 2 friends on the couch froze, dropping their wine glasses in shock. "Adrian, what are you talking about?" Rosalie's eyes welled with tears, her voice shrinking into her familiar helpless tone. "What did I do wrong? Is it because of the carpet? I can have it cleaned." "I said get out," Adrian repeated, his eyes dark and hollow, staring down at her face, a face he had spent 3 years believing was pure, innocent, and wronged. "Take everything you bought, take your friends, and get out of my house." "Adrian," Rosalie cried out, grabbing his sleeve. "You love me. You told me. Natalie took my place. We were supposed to be together once she left." "She didn't take your place, Rosalie," Adrian said, his voice breaking slightly, with a deep, self-loathing disgust. "You ran away when my company was dying. She was the one who saved it. And I was too blind to see it." He signaled to 2 security guards standing at the entrance. "Escort Miss Quinn and her guests out. If any of her belongings remain here by tomorrow morning, throw them in the trash." He turned away, ignoring Rosalie's hysterical screams and weeping as the guards firmly ushered her toward the door. The heavy front door slammed shut. Silence descended upon the grand house once more, a cold, heavy, suffocating silence. Adrian walked slowly up the stairs. He bypassed the guest room where he had slept for 3 years and stood before the primary bedroom door. He reached out his trembling hand, turned the brass knob, and pushed the door open. The room was completely empty. The white silk bedspread was pulled perfectly taut over the mattress. The vanity table where she used to sit was bare. No perfume bottles, no jewelry boxes, no hairbrushes. The walk-in closet was wide open, revealing bare hangers hanging in long, neat rows. There was no trace of her left. No smell of her orange blossom perfume, no subtle sound of her breathing in the quiet night. Adrian walked over to the vanity table, his fingers tracing the smooth, cool wood. He sat down on the small chair, pulled the manila folder from his jacket, and laid it on the empty table. He picked up a pen, his hands shaking violently, and turned to the last page of the divorce agreement. Beside her neat, elegant signature, Natalie Ramsay, he pressed the pen tip to the paper. But his hand froze. He couldn't write his name. The thought of signing those letters felt like sealing a vault that locked him in darkness forever. He pulled the pen back, dropped it onto the wood, buried his face in his hands, and wept silently in the empty, sunless room. Winter arrived in the city with a sudden, freezing snowstorm. The West District Arts Center project was progressing rapidly. The steel frame was complete, and the grand glass curtain wall was being installed section by section. On a Friday evening, Lynn and Associates hosted a celebratory cocktail reception at an upscale gallery downtown to mark the completion of the project's second phase. The gallery was packed with city officials, prominent architects, real estate developers, and journalists. I stood near the center of the hall, wearing a simple, tailored black velvet suit with a silver brooch on the lapel, holding a glass of sparkling water, chatting comfortably with a senior urban planner from out of town. Miss Ramsey's use of natural light in the main atrium is revolutionary, my mentor Mr. Lin said to a group of investors standing nearby, his face beaming with pride. She's already been nominated for the National Young Architect Award. I smiled politely, raising my glass. It was a team effort, Mr. Lin. As I took a sip of my water, a sudden shift in the crowd caught my attention. The loud chatter near the entrance died down slightly, people turning their heads toward the doors. I turned around casually and saw Adrian entering the gallery. He was wearing a black wool coat over a dark suit. He looked noticeably thinner, his cheekbones sharper, his eyes sunken. Gone was the arrogant, cold air of absolute authority that had defined him for years. In its place was an intense, restless aura of desperate exhaustion. His eyes swept through the crowded room, ignoring the greetings of prominent businessmen who approached him, until he locked onto me. Without pausing, he pushed past the crowd and walked straight toward my corner. Mr. Lin noticed the tension and subtly stepped back with the other guests, giving us space. Natalie. Adrian stopped 2 steps away from me. His voice was hoarse as if he hadn't spoken in days. Mr. Whitmore, I said, my tone remaining polite, cool, and distant. I didn't know Whitmore Enterprises was attending tonight's gallery event. I came for you, he said simply. He didn't care that dozens of eyes in the room were watching them. He reached into his coat pocket and took out an velvet box, holding it out toward me. I looked down at the box. Inside lay a breathtaking diamond necklace, the Blue Star, a famous piece auctioned in Paris 2 years ago for $12 million. 2 years ago, you looked at this necklace in a magazine. Adrian's voice trembled slightly. I bought it at the auction last week. It's yours. Everything I have. It's all yours, Natalie. I looked at the sparkling blue diamond, then looked up into his bloodshot, desperate eyes. 3 years ago, if he had given me a single warm glance, a single cup of tea, or a thoughtful word, I would have been overjoyed. I would have treasured it like gold. But now, looking at this $12 million necklace, I felt nothing. No anger, no excitement, no sadness. Just absolute, unyielding emptiness. Adrian, I said softly, calling him by his first name for the first time in months. Close the box. His hand trembled. Natalie, please. I know everything. Mr. Vance told me about the agreement 3 years ago. I know what your father did for my family. I know how terribly I treated you. I was an idiot, a blind, arrogant fool. It doesn't matter, Adrian. I interrupted him gently. He froze. What? It doesn't matter anymore, I repeated, my voice clear and serene, carrying softly over the background classical music of the gallery. You don't need to feel guilty, and you don't need to compensate me. I didn't marry you expecting you to love me, and I didn't leave you to make you regret anything. I left because the trade was finished. No, it's not a trade. Adrian took a desperate step forward, reaching out to grasp my hand, but I cleanly took a step back, keeping 2 feet of quiet air between us. His hand hovered in the empty space, shaking. Natalie, give me a chance. Let me start over. Let me court you properly. We can buy a new house. Anywhere you want. I'll support your firm. Adrian. I looked him straight in the eyes, my gaze as clear and still as a winter lake. Do you know why I never cooked again after that 3rd night? He swallowed hard, his throat moving painfully. Because I went out to eat with Rosalie. No. I smiled faintly, shaking my head. Because that night, standing in front of that table of cold food, I realized something very important. I didn't like braised ribs, I didn't like fish stew, and I didn't like waiting for a man who didn't care about me. Adrian's breath hitched violently. I spent 3 years hiding myself in your house, trying to be the sensible, quiet Mrs. Whitmore because I thought I owed it to the trade, I said quietly. But the moment I walked out of your door with my 2 boxes, I remembered who I was. I like architecture, I like working under the sun, I like drinking coffee on my sunny balcony, and I like my life right now. I looked at him, my expression devoid of any bitterness. You didn't break my heart, Adrian. You just made me realize how little I needed you in my life. Please sign the papers. Give both of us the dignity of a clean ending. I turned my back on him, raised my glass toward Mr. Lin in the distance, and walked back into the bright, warm center of the crowd, leaving him standing alone in the shadow of the doorway. Spring came early the following year. The West District Art Center was officially opened to the public in April. On the opening day, the sun shone brightly through the massive glass curtain walls, casting golden lattice shadows across the polished concrete floor of the main atrium. I stood on the 2nd floor balcony, leaning over the wooden railing, watching hundreds of citizens walk through the bright, beautiful space, taking photos, admiring the artwork, and enjoying the spring afternoon. Miss Ramsey. Maya ran up the stairs, holding a thick stack of mail and flowers. Congratulations. The National Design Board just announced the winners. You took first prize for public space innovation. The small team behind me erupted into cheers and applause. Mr. Lin came over, handing me a glass of champagne with a wide, proud smile. To Natalie Ramsey, the finest architect of her generation. To Natalie, everyone cheered. I laughed, taking the glass, feeling the cool bubble of champagne against my lips. As I clinked glasses with my colleagues, my phone chimed in my pocket. I pulled it out and opened a notification from my attorney. Attached to the email was a scanned PDF document. I opened it. It was the last page of the divorce agreement. In the bottom right corner, beneath my signature, was Adrian Whitmore's sharp, decisive dark ink signature, dated 3 days ago. Beneath it was the official red seal of the municipal court. The marriage was legally, entirely dissolved. I saved the document, closed the screen, and slipped the phone back into my pocket without a second thought. Natalie, look out the window. Maya pointed toward the park outside the glass wall. The cherry blossoms are blooming. I walked over to the grand glass wall and looked out. Outside, thousands of pink and white cherry blossom petals were floating on the spring breeze, swirling under the vast, clear blue sky. The world was bright, open, and filled with endless possibilities. I took a deep breath of the fresh spring air, stepped out onto the sunlit balcony, and walked forward into my own bright, unburdened future.